everyone. I'm here with Dr. Helen Scott to tell us about her career decision process throughout her time as an epidemiologist and before. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to ask, would you please tell us about yourself, Dr. Scott?
Sure. So I'm an epidemiologist and an assistant professor at the University of Toronto. Actually, I wear a lot of different hats right now. I also work at the World Health Organization based out of Geneva in a branch called the Partnership for Maternal, Newborn, and Child Health. So I really focus my work on women and children's health in developing countries, low and middle income countries. And in the afternoons, I actually work right now as the Chief Development Officer at a not-for-profit called the Pinnguaq Association. And what we do at Pinnguaq is look to create opportunities in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, for populations that historically have been excluded from careers in STEM. So I really feel like I get to wear a lot of hats. I get to teach, I get to do really intense epidemiology work at the World Health Organization, and then I get to help build a not-for-profit, which I'm really passionate about.
That's amazing. And Pinnguaq is actually running a workshop with us in the second week of our summer summit. So we'll get to hear more about them then, I'm sure too. So excited about our partnership with them. That is only going to grow. But wow, how did you even get to where you are with, especially WHO, like the World Health Organization? That is a big deal.
Yeah, I feel really fortunate right now. So, I mean, like anybody's career, it's been a long, windy journey. I guess I started during my undergraduate. I was doing a life sciences degree in Kingston, Ontario, and happened to get a job at a health unit doing as a research assistant, and I fell in love with public health. And I could really see how when you are doing work that impacts whole communities, you can really influence health in a way that you can't do if you're a physician or a nurse, where you're working with people one-on-one. And I was really inspired by that. But I also love politics, and I love communications, and I love to read, and I love to write. So the other thing that really interested me about public health was that public health is very political. We've certainly all seen this in the pandemic, right? That the science might say one thing, and of course, science is not always black and white, true or false, but you also need to get the buy-in of political leaders, and they make decisions, policy makers, and they make decisions. So I was really driven by that desire to kind of impact community level health versus one-on-one individual health. And then from there, I just, I worked at the health unit. I had a chance to work at Health Canada. Then I went back to school and did my doctorate. And after I finished my doctorate, my passion has always been maternal, newborn, and child health. And I'm a mom, so I have 5 children. So I actually spent a good chunk of my life pregnant and breastfeeding. So I live my passion for babies as well. But the Canadian government in 2010 invested in the Muskoka initiative, which was $1.1 billion. And this was Prime Minister Harper at the time, as part of the G8 initiative. And so I put a proposal into the Prime Minister's office to coordinate Canada's efforts to deliver on that $1.1 billion worth of funding. And my proposal was accepted. And I went on to found a not-for-profit called the Canadian Partnership for Women and Children's Health, with a group of really talented other NGOs and other not-for-profits and a steering committee. And I led that organization for 10 years. And that's really through that work, which was on an international stage, is how I made the connections at the World Health Organization. So after 10 years, I thought it was time to move on to the next step in my career, which was just quite recently. It was actually a year ago today was my last day at CanWaCH, it was a hard day to say goodbye to what felt like my 6th child, this project that I had built, but it's been great. Moving on has been great. And I'm learning a lot from working at the World Health Organization and at Pinnguaq.
There's so many questions I have, but do do you have a high point in your career that you can kind of think back on and
I
really?
mean, absolutely, so many actually. I'm going to say, and I know this might sound a little bit trite, but I have always wanted to learn more about Indigenous communities. And in my work in international development, I was working with communities around the world, but not really feeling like I was learning and growing in my own communities here in Canada. And it's really meaningful to me right now to be working at Pinnguaq, which is an Indigenous supporting organization at this time in Canadian history when we kind of have this consciousness awakening. So that's certainly been, I don't want to say a highlight, but it's quite meaningful to me that I've landed here at this time, and I know I'm learning and growing so much. Probably the highlights would be things like I flew to Africa with the Prime Minister of Canada and met other world leaders. I got to give Bono, the lead singer from U2, I got to give him a tour of the Canadian Parliament buildings. I had a chance to go to the United Nations General Assembly most years. And, I was sitting in the audience behind Hillary and Bill Clinton. Oh, and it was really neat. I'm a small town girl from Southern Ontario. And in those moments, it was just so fascinating to me that, one person can really have an impact. And if you work hard and, we think it's so hard to influence decisions and to advocate for the things that we feel passionate about. And here I was, a mom of 5, really just flying to Africa with the Prime Minister to do work on an area I was really passionate about. So it was really cool. And I guess, the highlights would be that we were able to secure tens of billions of dollars in funding from the Canadian government over 2 governments, a conservative government and a liberal government, over a span of 15 years. So that was really really amazing for the first part of my career.
I'm full of goosebumps, like honest. Did you have a sense of any of that? If you can think back, we're talking with grade 7 to 12 students. If you imagine yourself way back then, did you have a sense that this is where you might end up?
No, because I couldn't even have known what epidemiology was, And I do think that having the training, the technical training, has been a ticket, because there aren't a lot of women who are really skilled. I shouldn't say there aren't a lot of women, but in my space, there are a lot of women doing advocacy work, but there are fewer women that actually are doing the technical side of the work. And so I feel like that has been a ticket. But I don't want to say that I've stumbled into the opportunities, because certainly I've worked hard, but I also think that sometimes you can just set the GPS to know where you want to go, and you don't necessarily need to know how you're going to get there. But as long as you've got the address, the location where you want to go, that it will sometimes unfold in front of you. And that's really been my experience. I knew this was the area that I wanted to work in. I just kept working hard and saying yes to the opportunities that unfolded before me.
In terms of having that technical training, is that something that you've worked on as sort of continuous education, or was that part of your original?
Yeah, my master's degree and Ph.D. were in epidemiology. So it's really about, now that everyone is aware of the pandemic and we're all tracking rates and numbers and calculations, I think people are more aware of what we do as epidemiologists, but that's what my training was in. So I feel really grounded in data, using data to drive decision making.
Right. And do you have to kind of keep up with continuous training, or is there any, I guess, specific skills that you've had to work on yourself personally beyond the data and statistics of your training?
Yeah, so I'm actually a pretty strong math person. So I haven't done a lot of additional training in epidemiology, but what I have done a lot of additional training in, and some of this is experience and some of this is coursework, but finances and finance management. So I've had to have I always say I have like a on the job MBA, because I've really had to learn, how do you run a not-for-profit? How do you fund a not-for-profit? What are the accounting principles that need to be met so that you're sure that the funding is being well spent? Government reporting, government relations. How do you connect with the government? How does it work in order to make decisions? So a lot of the professional development that I've done has really been on the job experience.
One of my questions is what your biggest professional development accomplishment is, but I feel like I've heard so many. I'm wondering if you can think of perhaps an intern and what their maybe biggest accomplishment might have been, because I know you must have had interns over the years.
Yeah, for sure. So maybe like when you say intern, do you mean someone who was, because maybe I'll talk about an employee who joined my team, and we were leading up to a major advocacy campaign, and I was in an accident, a fairly bad accident. So I had to be off work for quite an extended period of time. And this person who was younger than me and was learning a lot, very, very talented, was learning a lot of skills in the sector. And she just executed beautifully on the campaign, did an amazing job, probably did a better job than I would have done. And I was just really proud of her and of the team who were able to just all work together at a time when I was off and just really excel in their jobs. And I was really proud of them for that accomplishment.
Do you generally work with a large team, or is it closer knit?
So all over the place. I mean, I've worked at Health Canada, which is a massive bureaucracy. When at the not-for-profit that I founded, which is the Canadian Partnership for Women and Children's Health, that was there were about 15 people, so it was quite a close-knit team, but virtual. So I've only ever worked virtually too. So this work from home, this is how I've always worked, because I've always had young kids and wanted to be home with my family. So I was ahead of the curve, I guess, in that way. And then, of course, now I'm at the WHO, and it's a small team at the WHO, but within a larger infrastructure. So I would say it's all over the place.
That is so interesting, because we get the question so often from our members, what can I do while living in Newfoundland and Labrador? So to know that you have always worked virtually is so interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I never dreamt that I could work at the World Health Organization, because I wasn't willing. It's great to be close to family, and I have parents who, my dad's not well, so I wanted to be able to care for my dad and be close to my nieces and nephews and all of those things. So I had just sort of accepted, well, I'll probably never work at the World Health Organization. And then a pandemic hit, and we can work anywhere in the world. So it was a blessing in disguise.
Has there been a major event that inspired you throughout your career to take that next step at any point?
Yeah, for sure. When I was finished my studies, I was starting to do this work where I was thinking about the Canadian Partnership for Women and Children's Health, but I was debating, would I go that route, the not-for-profit route, or would I pursue an academic career? So be a full-time university professor, try to find a tenure track position and teach and do research. And one of my mentors invited me to attend a conference in Malaysia, and it was called Women Deliver. And it was by far the most amazing conference I had ever been to. And it was at that conference just filled with women who inspired me in so many ways. I just decided, no, I want to stay in the not-for-profit space. There's a time and a moment in time right then when the world was kind of paying attention to the need to stop maternal and newborn deaths. And I just that was when I made the choice not to go that academic university route and to go the not-for-profit route.
That's wonderful. Is there an advancement that you hope to witness in your lifetime that's yet to come?
I mean, I just think in Canada, within the last 2 generations, we've been basically able to eliminate maternal deaths. Women very rarely die in Canada in childbirth. And, and newborns also, they die more often than women, but it's not that way in many countries in the world. Pregnancy and childbirth are still very, very high risk. So I just hope we've seen incredible progress. In 15 years, we've seen the rates of maternal deaths and child deaths drop in half globally. It's probably been one of the most successful anti-poverty exercises that the world's ever undertaken. It doesn't get a lot of press. I don't think everyone knows that this is happening, but it's really something else to see countries, and when you can lift women, so families aren't losing the mother and women are spacing their children out a little bit further. This is how you lift poverty out of community. This is how communities get lifted out of poverty. So it's fascinating to be able to work in this area and see that change happening.
It sounds absolutely fascinating. Is there if you've inspired any of our members now to follow a similar career path, what kind of advice would you give them?
And I mean, we don't often think about epidemiology as a route. A lot of people who have a passion for science, they think they want to be a doctor. They want to be a medical doctor. And then if it's not a medical doctor, maybe a nurse, a physiotherapist, kinesiology is really common right now. And often public health is sort of the backup plan or the way to get into medical school. I'll do a master's in public health and then maybe I can get into medical school. And I think that people don't often even know about epidemiology and the opportunities in this field around working in the not-for-profit space, but also in the research space. So for example, any pharmaceutical research is going to need somebody who can do the statistics and run the clinical trials and actually be able to interpret the data. Government policymakers, governments need people who understand the scientific literature and who can make recommendations. So I guess the advice I would give to any young women out there is, take a look at epidemiology, community health and epidemiology, and explore whether this might be another path that you might like to go on. Something I didn't share with you is when I was in about grade 11, I had a chance to go to, it was called the Forum for Young Canadians, and it was in Ottawa. And we met with Canadians all across the country who came to Ottawa, and we had to raise funds in our communities to go. You couldn't pay yourself. You actually had to fundraise to go. So we sold pizza and things like that. And I remember being in Ottawa thinking, like, someday I hope I can work in politics, but I didn't want to be a politician. And it's really neat that as a scientist, I've actually been able to work in politics and work with so many politicians and really get to work on the inside of government. So it's funny that a career in epidemiology can open all of these doors, but it really can.
Yeah, that intersection is amazing. And we talk often about picking a challenge that you want to work on and then researching how many careers actually follow in that challenge. Because I'm sure as parts of your team, I always fall back to, your IT person might have wanted to work in public health, but IT was their passion. So that's an easy example, but there are so many careers that make up whole teams working on these bigger challenges. Is there any other misconceptions people tend to have about epidemiology?
I think people generally think that we're all nerds. And that would generally be true. I guess a misconception is that you spend all day, every day doing statistics and, writing calculations and computations. And I would say early in my career, I probably did my fair share of statistical analyses and reporting. But as my career has evolved, I do less and less of that. And it tends to be people who, in the first few years of their careers, do some of that work, they gain the experience, and then they go on to become decision makers and use the information that gets generated. So I think that would probably be the biggest misconception. People think that I probably spend all day, crunching numbers, and I probably spend 10% of my time, if even that much, really doing actual statistical analysis at this point.
Do you imagine that there might be a boom of individuals getting into epidemiology after this COVID-19, or what do you think the labor market outlook is?
I definitely think that COVID-19 has alerted people to the careers, the profile of the work. It has profiled the work. But what is really fascinating is, having worked for as long as I have in public health, the general public, their attention span is quite small. So it will be interesting to see if this sticks, because we know that investing in public health pays great dividends, and that everything we can do to improve the health and well-being of our populations is worthy of our investment. And yet, people turn their attention to other priorities pretty quickly. So it'll be interesting. I know in the short term, we'll continue to invest in pandemic preparedness, but history tells us that probably as we get a little distance from this pandemic, now that we can kind of see a bit of an end in sight, that the interest might wane as well.
Right. Are there any specialties within epidemiology that you would point out as well?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So I specialize in maternal newborn child health, for example. But if you're working on the COVID work, you're probably an infectious disease epidemiologist. So that's its own specialty. But then there's cancer epidemiology, there's occupational health. So people who deal with workplace health and safety, that's its own branch of epidemiology. So yeah, there's quite a few different fields that you can study in.
Wow. I've learned so much myself, and I felt like I had a good handle, but there's so many career options out there. Is there any, I guess, advice you have for the girls who are just starting out? Maybe they aren't considering epidemiology, but what should their career decision process include?
Mm-hmm. I guess my experience is that you don't have to know. And, when I left my last job, after 10 years, I feel like I was doing it all over again, trying to figure out, what do I want to be when I grow up? And meanwhile, I have grown up children, and or my children are in university. So I think that I see young people and they have a lot of pressure on themselves to know exactly what they want to do. But we live in a knowledge economy where it's actually easier to learn at this time in history than any other time in history. You can literally, for free, sit in on lessons from some of the most amazing professors around the world. We can meet people from different cultures, just like this. You and I are having an interview across the country in real time. And so I think that we don't always have to know how. It's just, I like the question that you asked. What's the challenge you want to solve? What skills am I going to need? And then just don't be afraid to say yes to things. You can take a job or do an internship or a practicum and learn from it, but it not be your thing. You could change your mind and pick a different direction. And I also generally find, having supervised and managed dozens, if not hundreds of people, hard work always pays off. You might not know how to do something, but I think when you show up and you're coachable, so you're interested in learning, you want to, you take the initiative to ask questions, to explore, that always pays off in a career.
That is a wonderful note to end on, and I'd like to thank you so much for spending this past half hour with us and letting the girls in on a few of your tips and tricks.
It was my pleasure. Thanks very much for inviting me to join you.